Hello, I'm Toycat and welcome back to my second channel video. Did you know that most people around the world live in some form of a democracy? This means that the governance of these people is decided by big elections that happen every so often, and maybe you've heard about these elections. Maybe you like to follow them because you're curious about who will be in charge and you like it from a political standpoint. No, politics, if you don't live in the country, to me is a sport. There is a blue team, there is a red team. Wasn't it exciting to follow to see, ooh, were the blue team going to win? Or was it going to be the red team going to be the returning champions? Is it going to be the underdogs or the overdogs? It was going to be a big thing and I was very excited. However, 2020's gone. There's no more big sports elections to follow, except maybe there is. Did you know every year lots of elections happen in lots of countries, and some of those elections are very consequential, like the ones I'll be talking about, which mostly take place in Europe sometime in 2021. The entire future of nations is going to be determined by some of these elections, as well as the future of multinational blocks. It's very exciting. Let's talk about some 2021 elections, starting with, of course, Scotland. So Scotland is a constituent country of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And so, obviously they have UK-wide elections, but also ever since the 1998 Scotland Act, they've had their own devolved parliament where they can work on devolved issues. Basically, if you're American, think about it like a state government. Lots of competencies are devolved specifically to the Scottish to vote on and decide for themselves. They have their own Scottish parliament, and that Scottish parliament is having their election this year in May. And that is really interesting for a lot of reasons, but the biggest one is because of this party, the SNP, the Scottish National Party, the people who are very in favour of Scotland being an independent nation. And this is an interesting idea because obviously right now, a lot of people might even internationally think like, oh, it's not already its own nation, and that's kind of made complicated by the fact that the UK, which is the country, the subdivision of the UK, which is a country, are called countries. So England, Wales, and Scotland are countries, all within a country, but like country in that sense means something very different to country in the sense of the UK. It gets confusing, and even people living in, everyone I speak to that lives here doesn't really understand it, they just go along with it. You don't know when a website form asks you for what country you live in, no one knows what to say. However, people in Scotland do know what to say, and that's that Scotland is its own country, because in the Scottish National Party have been very, very dominant for a while. Part of the reason why, in fact, it's actually gone back since, because when the Parliament was first started, the devolved Parliament, it kind of followed the nationwide election results. Like, oh yeah, the red party is in charge, and like, oh yeah, so the blue parties and the yellow parties have something. But the SNP grew and grew and grew pretty much every election, as you can see right here. Besides 2003, where only the Conservatives gained. Man, look at this Scottish Conservative leader. What a weird looking woman. No offense, Annabelle Golding, I'm sure you're lovely. Actually, you know, am I sure you're lovely? But with that said, you can see that, like, oh yeah, and then in 2011, something even crazier happened. The SNP not only got the largest number of seats, but they got enough seats to have a majority by themselves. The whole system was set up so to avoid any party having an overall majority. It's a very proportional voting system, and that's what makes this so interesting. So as a result of that, and as a result of the current Conservative government, they figured they would set to rest the whole Scottish independence issue by having a referendum. In 2014, Scotland had a vote: should they remain a part of the United Kingdom, or should they go their own way, be their own independent nation? And as you can see, most of the country voted no. It was, again, if you look at there's a lot of results. We're using Wikipedia pages because they're nice, solid pieces of information that no one's going to be like, oh, that's actually really biased, that's fake information. No, 55% of people voted to stay in the UK, 44% of people voted to leave the UK, and as you can see, looking at this, it was mostly the cities which voted to leave the UK, and mostly the countryside and the islands and stuff like that voted to stay there. Basically the kind of conservative liberal split that you expect from any major country around the world. People in cities vote slightly differently to people outside of cities. Isn't that interesting? So with that said, the reason that this got so interesting is because you'd figure, like in a lot of other countries, the referendum would set things for bed forever. However, there's a lot of interesting quirks to this. The biggest one, the biggest one people bring up is that, like, oh yeah, one of the reasons they said you should stay in the UK is because you'd lose the EU membership otherwise, and obviously something Brexit. So with that said, in the 2015 UK election, the Scottish National Party not only got the majority of seats in Scotland, but they got 56 of the 59 seats in Scotland. If you look at Scotland, it's just a yellow wave with one blue seat here, one orange seat over there, and one red seat there. Everything, again, they got an absolute wave of seats otherwise, and so they used that as an argument to be like, hey, we want another referendum. I think things have changed since then, and so what happened is they asked, especially after the UK triggered the ability to leave the EU, they're like, hey, we should be able to leave, and they although the Scottish Parliament does not have the ability to do that by themselves, they do have the ability to ask to do it, so they asked the UK government, and what the UK government said was no. Theresa May was in charge at the time, and so, it's done for, right? The options at that point are really interesting, and it ties into the future. We'll get there now. But then, they, like Boris Johnson, new prime minister, right? And, he says that the vote was a once-in-a-generation thing, and that's his kind of stance. So 2021, this election is so important for the Scottish National Party, because even though they don't have the ability to, the political, legal ability to ask for a referendum, to hold a referendum, what they do have is the moral, the will of the people right to hold a referendum if they can get the majority that they need. If the majority of people vote for independent supporting parties, then of course you should have independence. They vote for parties that support that, they should get the thing. And whereas if they do not get that, then it's obviously a different thing. Because honestly, looking at this election, unlike every one we're going to talk about, we know for a fact there is no world unless there is literally a nuclear bomb dropped in Glasgow South Side. There is no world where the Scottish National Party are not the largest party. The only interesting thing here is, do they get that majority of seats, which can make a big difference between them and the Scottish Greens, who are also in favour of independence? Do they get the majority of seats? And then also, who is the second largest party? Right now, the Labour Party, the traditional winners of Scotland, are third place. They don't even have a leader, as you can see. TBD, that's not a very good leader. And you can see that, like, oh yeah, so who comes second or third place, Conservatives or Labour? And then way more interestingly is this new Reform Party, which is, so we had a party that was basically in favour of Brexit when it was starting to happen. Then we had another party in favour of Brexit when it was happening, but not the way they wanted. And now we have a party that, because Brexit's happened, it's like Eurosceptic still, even though we're out of the EU, but it's also in favour like anti-lockdown. It's a populist party, let's just put it that way. There is a populist party, and that populist party might do better than what is traditionally the third party of the UK. And so yeah, whether the Lib Dems can come 4th, 5th, or maybe even 6th is a real thing that could happen, which is pretty tragic for this man right here. Does he deserve that? That's for you to decide. And so yeah, the 2021 Scottish Parliament election is going to result in the future of Scotland, or at least, again, is it going to be a thing where it's like, okay, we put this one to bed, 2014 happened and now there's just one party that keeps on talking about it? Or is it going to decide, hey, even though we had a vote that was under different terms, we want another one, we've changed our mind, and we are being kept inside the UK against our will. That narrative comes from this election, and that is a big narrative. And wow, I've spent 7 minutes talking about Scotland. I'm sure no one's offended and jumping to the comments, because here's the thing, if you're a Scottish nationalist, you're like, no, it doesn't matter what we have the ability to do, legal rights, you goddamn British, I guess they'll call me a Tory or something, right? Like, oh, following laws. No, that's, again, not my party, not my belief. My belief here is that, like, there is the legal right, which is held in the UK. You need the UK to agree to that legal right, or you need to somehow, again, you can go the guerrilla route, but you've got to do an unofficial referendum. There's a lot of, like, really interesting moves here they've got to make, and I think having a good political operative to do so is what the SNP has right now. Will they have that for the next X number of years? That's the question that will determine whether Scotland one day goes independent or whether the tide shifts the other way. We don't know for sure. Right now, we're living in the middle of potential UK history. With that said, though, let's move into the next thing. Did you know London's having an election? It's actually not a very big deal. I'll be honest with you. Again, I want to be like, yeah, it's a big election. So London is a really interesting electoral constituency because unlike most other cities that you expect to be very, very heavily left, especially a city this big, that London is not a hugely left city. It has a lot of outlying suburbs in there, kind of like the Staten Island of New York. And interestingly enough, the former Prime Minister was actually the first Conservative Mayor of London. Wow, did you know that? Now you know that if you don't know that. He's been the only Conservative Mayor of London since its formation, and so, interestingly enough, Sadiq Khan is pretty much the only successful Labour politician in the country right now, and so this election and the margins by which it happens, the campaign by how it all happens, etc., is really going to determine his political future, maybe nationally speaking as well. Like, he's got all the characteristics to potentially be a future successful Labour politician. Who knows if that happens? Again, the fact that, literally, in a a 2012 election, Boris Johnson's running for mayor. He was mayor till 2016. Then in that time between 2016 and just 2019, he goes from being mayor to being MP to being leader of the Conservatives and being prime minister, winning an election in 2019. It's kind of wacky, the timetable that all happened in, and like it's almost a fog. But like as someone who saw that happen very quickly, it's a reminder that like this is one of the more powerful posts in the UK. But let's not pretend it's like all important. If you don't live in London, it's not going to affect you too much. It does determine a lot of city policies that do eventually get taken up by other cities. But if you don't even live in another city, you don't even care. And if you don't live in the UK, then you know what? Is it going to be Sadiq Khan or Sean Bailey? It's going to be Sadiq Khan. Again, it's one of those like pretty much determined things. And get back to me in 2021 if you think I'm wrong. Because someone's always like, nah, the opinion polls say that my girl Sean Berry or my boy Sean Bailey ain't going to win this. But those opinion polls are rigged. But then every time the opinion polls turn out to be broadly correct, maybe minus a few points, it's like, but that's just coincidence. Speaking of coincidences, did you know the Catalonia region is a place that quite likes the idea of independence? And it's interesting because unlike most other regions that have breakaways on the idea of like pure, we are different, we deserve to be different, and this one has like a little bit of a financial element to it too. Catalonia is not only an autonomous community with its own language and there's a lot of things that make it very unique and separate, but also Catalonia is a region that is wealthier on average than the rest of Spain. So yeah, they've done a lot of things to try and be independent. This will determine, to a lesser extent, I mean, honestly, again, it's one of those situations where, by the way, I love Catalonia's domain extension is cat. And so, like, Together for Catalonia, this is unrelated, but, like, I love that things in Catalonia get abbreviated to CAT. So there's the JX Cat Party. I'm on board with the JX Cat Party. And, like, look, and they're part of the Junts X Cat, Together for Catalonia. And they've changed their name, have they? Oh, Junts X Cat has gone to JX Cat. They've started abbreviating more. Isn't that beautiful? Do you want more from me than reading out political party names and being like, yeah, I like that every single one of these people, look at them, that the leader's seat are all in Barcelona. Barcelona, 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 but they lost their seat. So I think that's interesting. Maybe you do too. Maybe you disagree. Maybe you say, Toycat, I need interesting things, not that. You said there's 5 elections, probably. I don't know what I titled this video. So here is the Israeli legislative election. And did you know Israel is not a part of Europe, but sometimes it pretends to be because they can't be part of the Arab football leagues because everyone refuses to play games with them. So Israel is part of Eurovision and a part of the European football leagues. And that's really interesting and all. But it's also interesting, you know, the other sport in Israel is elections. And boy, they like to keep us hanging with their elections. How many elections do you think there's been in the past 2 years? Well, there's one happening in just a month, and it's going to be super interesting. There's one that happened March of 2020. There was one in September of 2019 and one in April of 2019. This is their 4th election in less than 2 years, if you're following that correctly, which is incredibly interesting, especially because of how similar the results are. You can see Benjamin Netanyahu lost 6 seats in 2019. Then he gained back some of those seats back in 2020. And will he lose those seats again, or will he gain even more? Super interesting to see. Also, you can see how like what used to be like a formidable opposition, the Benny Gantz of the world have lost a lot of seats because of the coalitions. There's a lot of very interesting things happening in Israel, but the most interesting thing to me is I like to dive into, because it's a proportional system, and I like to dive into like, so what are all the parties all about? If you look at the different parties in Israel, it's like there is traditionally proportional systems crowd. There are more parties on the left than the right, because the right is very good at staying together, like uniting for the cause. It's better to have a less bad option than a really terrible option, whereas the left tends to split. In Israel, because they have so many axes, their political party splits down. So, for instance, here's a party that was originally for the Russian-speaking Israelis, and it's a national movement with a clear vision to follow in the bold path. I read this entire thing, no idea, but the Benjamin Netanyahu leads a center-right coalition, the Likud party. Then the second biggest party is centrist. Then blue and white is centrist and liberal. Then there's the joint list, which is a variety of parties. We're not going to pretend we know that. Basically, my point here is there's a bunch of right-leaning parties in Israel. Oh, here's Telem that has 3 seats. Oh, the Jewish Home, a religious Zionist party. And then they split down ethnic lines because there's Jews and there's Arabs. Honestly, Israel is such a fascinating country to follow elections for, and you won't understand any of it, but if you want to see an election that you don't understand, if you want to see a bunch of stuff where you're like, so what's happening, who's winning, this is the election for you. But if you want an election that you can follow in clear, plain terms, how about the German federal election? Germany is the EU's largest country by quite a substantial margin now in terms of economy and population, and also, you know, the kind of unofficial leaders of it. People look to Angela Merkel as kind of the figure of Europe. Even though the European Union has a president, do you know her name? I bet you don't know her name. Do you know Angela Merkel? Do you know how long she's been in charge too? It's absurd. So Angela Merkel won in 2017. That's fair. She won in 2013. That's fair. She won in 2009. Isn't that like 10 years ago now? She won in 2005, and if you have to go all the way back to 2002 before she wasn't in charge. She's been in charge for most now of the post-unification era, and this is the last, again, she stood down as leader of the party. She's been only leader of the country, but that will be changing in 2021. That is a huge change by itself, but the other bigger change here, the more interesting thing to me, is that the right-leaning party and the left-leaning party have been in some form of coalition for a while. Again, because if you look at German politics, there's the CDU is a right-leaning party. Call it the Conservative Party. They actually, the C stands for Christian Democratic. It stands for Christian Democratic Union, so like they're religious right. It's an interesting thing. And then there's an even more right-wing version that runs in Bavaria, but we'll ignore that for now. So there's Christian right, then there's like Social Democrats, the SPD, Social Democratic Party of Germany. Okay, sure, I've got that going on fine. And then it gets really wacky from there, because Germany, again, it's kind of almost perfectly ordered. They have the center-left, the center-right, but because they've got a proportional system, they also have the left that splits in the two sides, the left side, and then there's the green side, and then you've got the right that splits in two sides of like, oh yeah, there's the AfD, who are like Eurosceptic, populist, maybe anti-immigrant, you could say, and then you've got the FDP, who are right-leaning economically, but maybe you could say left-leaning socially, or you could say they don't have a social stance, whichever one you want to believe that is. You know, is not having a stance having a stance? In politics, interestingly, the answer is actually yes. But yeah, it's interesting to look at this. It's also interesting to see that, like, oh yeah, the trend that you might have spotted in Scotland, where like the Green Party has 2 leaders, which it almost seems like there's a great joke in there about like, you know, something about the left being lazy. Both of the left-leaning parties, or the very left-leaning parties in Germany, have 2 leaders, as you can see right here. They look like good friends in the left, Die Linke, and the Green, I don't know how you say green in Germany. It's been a long time since I said German. Anyway, so it's really interesting to see that. It's also interesting to see that, like, yeah, Germany has been very, very avoidant of the AfD. In fact, they've changed their leader twice since 2017 because of the Thuringian government crisis. And this is like the weirdest crisis to me. I remember following it at the time and thinking, this seems a bit contrived. But basically, the people of Thuringia voted for the Christian Democratic Party as the second biggest party, but the largest single party was the AfD. And there's kind of just an unspoken rule in German politics that the AfD, the Alternative for Germany, anti-immigrant, is not a stance that we are allowing. Because, you know, like, let's call it the far right, just to keep things simple. If you allow the far right into power, Germany and the far right, I mean, it's a match made in heaven, am I right? But with heaven in air quotes, and I guess also surrounded by gas in an enclosed space. So you get the point that, like, that's not a thing that they're one over there. And so because the Christian Democratic Union joined with the AfD, because that was the most logical 2-party government that you can make, it was a huge crisis. And the result of that was Anna, you know, her name is a mess. And you know what, her politics are a mess too. Annegret Kramp-Karrenbauer, you know, have a shorter name, and you know what, she had such a long name, they decided to fire her for that, and so instead, Armin Laschet won the party leadership, and he is going to be the Chancellor candidate for 2021. However, if you look at previous elections, again, if you follow Angela Merkel back, even though she's like solidly popular, like as a leader, she is popular. I've spoken to many very left-leaning people in Germany, even though they don't agree with, you know, like they don't want right-leaning policies, they admit she's the right person to lead the country. Like, I admire any country that could be like, don't like the policies, but they're leading the country, and that's important. Like, uniting around a leader, even if you want like a better leader, being like, well, this is the person in charge. So that's something Germany does very well and has done very well under Angela Merkel. But you can see how, by the way, it's Angela, not Angela. But you know what? This is an English-speaking video. I'll call her Angela Merkel if I want to. What are you going to do? You're going to stop me mispronouncing her name? Frank Walter Steinmeier. It's actually hard to say names like that in English. You kind of have to default to German pronunciation just to do it. Anyway, with that said, you can see how the vote has been slowly faltering down to an all-time low in 2017 of 32.9%. In fact, the SPD, the traditional left-leaning party, they're in kind of a crisis. They only got a fifth of the seats, of the votes, sorry. And yeah, basically, the small parties are thriving at the big party's expense. And which small party is doing the best? It's that AfD. And there is a rule in German politics about ignoring the AfD and pretending they don't exist, which is smart. That's how you win elections. You say, there's some bad people that vote for bad people. We ignore those politicians and we just pretend that they're not going to work. That is a smart system that they're apparently working by. But yeah, so basically, the most likely coalition is going to be these guys and these guys. But these guys are like, hey, wait, while we're going into coalition with her, we get all this, the flack for not being a good enough country. So maybe they want to stop that. And what about the FDP guys? They, as you can see, in 2013 lost all of their seats because they got below the 5% anti... it's... Actually, wait. This is... I need to tell you about this. So, one of the dumbest things about proportional representation, in my opinion, controversial politics of Toy Cat now. Okay, we've gone over some vague covering of elections. My take, every country... New Zealand requires this. A lot of proportional systems require 5% of the vote minimum. If you don't get 5% of the vote, you don't get any seats. And it's a way to avoid extremism. But in Germany, especially if you go to 2013... In Germany, you can see how, like, oh yeah, the FDP lost their seats, and now you can see how the party that I would argue isn't extreme, Freedom Democratic Party, just classic liberalism, is a pretty mainstream, if maybe to the right policy in some countries, but like that party got kicked out of parliament. Meanwhile, the only people that you probably could call it extreme, and the other people you can call extreme on the other end, the Die Linke and the AfD, both got into parliament, and it's like, I feel like, got a suspicion right here. Oh, actually, in 2013, both AfD and FDP lost. The fact that the left was the third largest, it's like, extreme ideas are going to get into parliament if people vote for them. Let's not put arbitrary thresholds on there, because that empowers them even more, in a way, in my opinion. And I think that politics shouldn't just be for big parties. It should be for people. I think it should be about electing the people you want to be in charge, but maybe I'm crazy. Also, something interesting, they have significantly reduced the number of seats in the Bundestag, as you can see. I think that's interesting. Maybe you find that interesting too. I think smaller parliaments seems to be a trend across the world, except America, which is trying to increase the size of theirs. So, yeah, with that said, I hope you'll enjoy this video, unless you didn't, in which case, stop watching videos you don't like. You're 22 minutes in here, and I'll give you a sneak peek at my next video. I want to talk about cities, because, that Scotland issue is such an interesting one. The idea that cities vote differently to the neighboring areas. This came up in the New York video. Like, the Staten Island votes different to Manhattan and all the other boroughs. When you look at the UK 2019 election, you know what the red areas are? They're the areas that are generally metropolitan places, whereas the blue is the big rural counties. Why is there such a big difference there? What is it about cities that are interesting? And although I don't know if I can answer that big question, I do know that I can say, hey, I want to talk about the biggest cities in the world, and so we're going to do that at some point soon. But for now, thank you for watching, I hope you all enjoyed, and I'll see you all in the next one, unless I die in a tragic accident. Goodbye.